So, Saba Alemayoh is a young Melbourne-based entrepreneur who was in the Scale Roundtable of the 2014 Getting Down to Business program, which is part of iGen, the Innovation Generation. Until last year, she was a lieutenant in the Australian Army, the founder of an employee and wellbeing consultancy, a business graduate with a major in marketing and politics with a minor in philosophy. Her business, Saba's Health Food, has enjoyed good success and growth in recent months, with her products entering new markets, onto the shelves in a wider range of stores. And she's also exhibiting in the Emerge in Yarra Festival from the 14th to the 20th of June through the festival hub. So, welcome, Saba, to Converge for Young Entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for joining us. But what I'm bursting to know, really, to start off, is how do you fit it all in?
To be honest, the trick is just lots of coffee and lots of not sleeping would be the best way that I would say
So just
that I
squeeze
fit it all in.
hours of a day.
And I've also got a policy. There are lots of things that if I don't need to, I'm not a perfectionist in some areas. Sometimes good enough will do.
Yeah, good.
And it generally does because people can't actually notice the difference between your so-called 90% and the effort that it takes to get that extra 10% to make it 100. People usually can't even notice that anyway.
Yeah.
So it's something that makes you feel like, oh, I've got the perfect product, and it adds to your confidence. But it's usually something people don't recognise or notice.
Right, and that could be the
That's my thought anyway.
5 extra hours of sleep for you that you sacrifice.
Correct.
It's not even noticed. Ah, that's good.
Yeah, that little additional topper that you think you need, but you really don't.
Ah. And did you learn that the hard way, or have you always kind of been like that?
Because I usually used to do a lot of things where I work backwards. So on my timeline, I usually go, this is when this needs to be executed. So I don't actually go, when would I like this? I actually set the date, the finish time, and then work backwards from there. Which times and dates things have to be finished.
Yep.
And as a result, I stick rigorously to that time. And I've just noticed sometimes, just let's say, for example, blogs that I used to post, I noticed that even when I put 6 hours in and when I did a blog over an hour and a half, the difference was very minuscule. Right. And it's barely people could barely tell. And I'd ask my partner all the time, but I'm like, oh my God, this amazing amount of effort onto this one and so many hours. And here it is. And then it'll be one that I just sort of quickly scrubbed up together. And he couldn't notice that either. So I noticed even when I was putting programs together as an employee wellbeing consultant, there's lots of little bits and pieces that you feel you have to add that people don't notice. So things about the flyers and things like that, people don't notice those little bits.
That's a great tip, thanks. So working full-time and setting up a business at the same time is a reality many young entrepreneurs face. So what challenges have you faced in running your employee wellbeing consultancy full-time while setting up Saba's Health Food sort of complementary to that? And how have they been obstacles to achieving certain milestones along the way?
Yeah. So what I do usually with my occupational health and wellbeing that I was doing the consulting for, and I still do consulting that, I used a lot of the 9 to 5 hours that I call the contact times for that, and then tried to do a lot of the Saba's Health Foods stuff on after hours or dead time. So for example, in my industry, on Mondays, you really couldn't get much done. So when you're calling HR consultants and OH&S managers on Monday, generally they're inundated. They're dealing with whatever weekend spill has occurred, etc., etc. So I used to use that time then to set up my work on Saba's Health Foods, and also really dividing the things that you need to do during hours and the things that you can afford to do after hours and weekends.
Great.
So, obviously when I'm dealing with if I need to speak to a graphic designer or I need to actually speak to a packaging company, I need to ensure that I do that between 9 to 5. But if it's things like where I was developing my website content, I could do that on the weekend, I could do that after hours, I could do that before hours. So really making sure that you plan around everyone else is on 9 to 5. So when you need to deal with other people, you're doing it in between those blocks. And when it's something that requires only yourself, doing it outside of those hours. That gives you more flexibility to work within.
Yeah, awesome. Great. And
Mm.
according to your website, Saba's Health Food
Yes.
is an Australian-owned brand selling Teff flour both
Yep.
online and in health food stores around Melbourne. So what exactly is Teff, and where did the inspiration come from to bring it into the Australian market?
Yeah, so teff is an ancient grain of Ethiopia. It's naturally gluten-free and it's quite gelatinous, so it binds together really well. It's also a super grain, so it's been dubbed by The Guardian and a few other, the Washington Post and New York Times and a few other health magazines as well, it's going to be the next quinoa, the next
Right.
for quinoa, because it's one of the smallest grain in the world, so it's about the size of poppy seed, but it's also quite nutritious. So it's got calcium in it, it's got iron, magnesium, all those components in it, and it's got the complete amino acids. So for those that are obsessed with nutrition will understand that means that it's a bit easier to absorb into your system because it's got that complete. And the reason they believe it's got all of that is because of its size. Therefore, when you sort of grind it, then the husk of it maintains. And also the big word of the ancient aspect of it, the fact that it's been cultivated for so long ago, about 50 to 80,000 years ago. So that's sort of the background of the grain. Yeah, 50 to 80,000 years ago, they reckon they've had it for. It's indigenous to Ethiopia. Now, this is where my connection to it comes from. So I'm of an Ethiopian background, and I grew up eating teff, and teff is a staple in Ethiopia, so they don't have, not that they don't have, but they don't consume wheat. So they don't have wheat-based breads that we have in Australia. They don't have pasta at all, but it's not wheat-based products they're not consuming. So as a result, a lot of their consumption is teff. And we used to eat it all the time, and my sister's a celiac, and after that we discovered, it's gluten-free, so that became our new thing. We're like, so she can eat it. And while I was eating it, a lot of my vegan friends were wanting to get their hands on it because of the iron content, and it's also quite highly spoken of in the vegan community. So that's how that connection to me came about. So I ate it due to my cultural background. Didn't think it was anything special. My sister's diagnosed with celiac, so we find out it's gluten-free. And then a few people here and there kept asking me if I could get them some. And usually the Ethiopian community, before it was made illegal the way we used to, so it's illegal now to export out of Ethiopia. But before that, what we used to do was, my mum literally, when we went to Ethiopia, anyone from our family, it's sort of a family tradition that you leave whatever clothing and whatever baggage you came with, empty out your suitcase, fill it up with teff, and bring back teff.
Oh, right.
Yes, through customs. Yes, through customs. And then you have all these customs people trying to investigate what it is, and you're sitting there going, oh, God, here we go. So, yeah, we'd come back with bags and bags of this stuff. And Mum used to bring back chili as well. So just, they're all crazy about that stuff. So they'd bring back Ethiopian chili and Ethiopian coffees and Ethiopian this. And you'd be like, oh,
awesome.
God.
So
it was sort of like those custom border control shows.
Yeah, right. So with the bringing this into the market, it's really very much a time and a place kind of product. Like you've really seized on where the Australian community's at, and particularly around Melbourne and so forth. With this, a lot of people are gluten-free and so forth these days. So you're kind of lucky in that way. Do you see it? Where you had the right timing to sort of introduce this product.
I don't know about lucky because I don't know. First, I'm not a big luck sort of believer because the thing is, I actually launched it because of that. I launched it because the market was
ripe.
The demands were in the right place. So I didn't actually think, I'm going to launch this and now it's great, it's worked, it's this. No, I launched it because I kept hearing on blogs people talking about where can I get this teff product, and hearing these vegan communities online talking about it. And hearing a lot of, and then being familiar with the gluten intolerant community, and knowing that one of the big issues that they've got is when people become gluten intolerant, baking with gluten-free products is really difficult. So one of the things that makes it quite hard for them, and that's one of their frustrations. So when I say things like, it's got gelatinous qualities, to a person that's not gluten intolerant, it's like, yeah, of course it does. It does. But for a gluten-intolerant person who's been cooking with rice flour, corn flour, amaranth flour, they understand what that gelatinous means. They're just like, yes.
Right. Awesome.
because when you bake with rice flour, when you bake with corn flour, it breaks apart on you. So to me, I launched because of the market rather than
So seizing
I launched in
the
market.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Ah, good for you.
Yeah, correct.
It
So
does seem
it was
like a pretty
that way.
versatile ingredient. I saw on your Facebook page you've got a heap of recipes and these amazing, tempting photos, including a heaven in a cup brownie, 3-ingredient tortillas, pan-fried bread, donuts. So, from a marketing perspective, what do you see as the biggest advantage of this little super grain?
For me at the moment, the biggest advantage actually is the way it cooks will probably
Mm-hmm.
be one of the big ones.
Yes.
I think that is a big deal about that,
Mm-hmm.
and what my customers really like. And also the fact that it's a super grain and has that ancient grain
Yeah.
title to it as well, and has a super grain title. I try not to use those terminologies so much because I just think generally we should all be eating balanced foods, and I'm not
Right.
for the fads of having, oh no, you now have to replace all your flours with Teff flour. No, it's just about the combination of everything
Right.
to that, and the fact that it's gluten-free. So for me, it's basic 3 ones. First, it's that it cooks really well. It's got the gelatinous quality to it, which to any gluten-intolerant person means a lot to them. Then it's that it's a super grain and ancient grain. So for those people that are looking at going back to whole foods and going back to ancient grains and things like that, it's a plus. And my third thing is that it's gluten-free. So if you've got gluten intolerance, then, and also a lot of people are moving away from wheat, bam, you've got that as well.
Awesome. Great. So you founded Saba's Health Food during Getting Down to Business last year as an extension of the consultancy business you're already running. So in what ways did being part of the Getting Down to Business program help you with Saba's Health Food, and especially in relation to scaling and making sort of connections and that kind of thing?
I've thought about that question, and to be honest, this is going to be one of the most difficult, I guess, to sell it to the future people that participate in this program. It wasn't tangible, but it definitely helped me a lot. So I can't pinpoint exactly to say this, but it's sort of the equation of the, what is it, the whole of the part.
Right, the whole is
Some of
greater
the parts
than the
being
sum of the
whole.
parts. Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. That was definitely, like, I found it extremely inspiring, and I didn't realize. So every time I'd go after these stretch days, and I'd come away, and bam, you'd be like, okay, I've got these gazillion things that need to happen, and this is what we need to do. Yep. And then you go to another stretch day, and something else would come out, and you go, yep, okay, I've got to clean up this act, and so on. So I found, in terms of, I can't pinpoint and say this, but I definitely know it helped a lot. But I just cannot pinpoint and say at this point there. I found the networking was amazing, and finding out where people were at.
Yeah.
And people always had tips. So, for example, simple things that would have taken you, another 6 months of research to find out. I think there was an entrepreneur in my group who gave us a tip for a time when you're actually, especially when I was doing the consulting work, to actually ensure that you record the time against the client that you're doing the work on.
Right.
Timesheets.
Yep.
It was a fantastic app that somebody gave me the tip of that took away so much of wasted time that I was wasting.
Yeah.
Something like, as in, I think there was a looking at your digital footprint, and we went through assessing your presence online. That then obviously added to my business again. So it's lots of little bits and pieces that you just go, and you don't necessarily notice at the end until you reflect. You go, you've done lots of little bits of modifications that help and enhance your business.
And we've sort of had quite a lot of feedback from other participants from last year where perhaps during the year, a little bit like what you said, and during the year they didn't necessarily see the value or notice the value as it was being presented to them. But subsequently now, having moved out of the program, sort of, look back and reflect and think, wow, it was so great to be part of that community. And, the little tips and help and support that I got along the way. And as you say, you might have come to something eventually anyway, but being able to cut 6 months or a year out of, until you got to that point yourself.
Definitely.
Pretty valuable.
Definitely. I think I agree with that 100%. I think that's what people need to take into account. You may eventually come to those points. It's not that you're going to learn or you reach a moment that would have never been evident, but it's just that cutting off that period of time. There were so many things where I felt like, oh, that would have taken me another 6 months of work before I worked that one out, or that would have taken me another 3 months, and so on and so forth. So it's just about speeding up that learning process
Great.
And some of it is also about teasing out what's in your head. When all of a sudden you're forced to explain to these people constantly about what you are trying to do, then it really sort of, even faults that you may hide or not hide in front of the group, you start to realize faults in your systems. When you start listening and start explaining and you go, hang on a second, I just made half that explanation up midway through the thinking process.
Right.
And you go, that doesn't work. You know, things like that, where you then start to really scrutinize and really put the fine-tooth comb over your business, I guess.
Yeah, good. Ah, awesome. And you've got like a captive audience and you know, people who are actually interested and, you know, in what you're doing rather than boring all your friends with it. And people who are a little bit biased and they're like, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
And people that understand, because when you're explaining it to your friends, like something like if you're explaining, I'm having an issue with this accounts thing with MyOb or something, and they still don't understand really what you're talking about.
Right.
Even friends that work in corporate Australia, the way they seem to think about everything is in millions and millions of dollars, and you have to try to explain to them, no. This has to happen in less than 100, not $1 million budget, or this has to happen in thousands, not $1 million, you know. Yeah. Whereas I found that to be the case when you're speaking to other people.
Yeah, right. And on that point of money, so obviously capital can be a major factor for most young entrepreneurs especially. So how did you leverage income from your, you know, consultancy work to help finance the startup costs and everything of Saba's Health Foods?
Okay. So my business initially, my consulting, I started with $6,000 of just my own savings.
Yep.
And I've always been anti, and I'm still very anti. Like I take down very minimum wage, just barely to survive. And for 18 months of my business, I didn't take out any money. Mm-hmm. Obviously, everyone has to survive. So the way I used to survive was I am still a qualified personal trainer. So I used to train individuals between 5 a.m. till 8 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
And then train individuals again at from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So I do run classes and run with individuals, and then I do like one weekend shift at a gym. So that was my income.
Yep.
So that completely separate. So I still was working on my business full time, Monday to Friday, with a bit of half day Saturdays, and then I'd work before hours and after hours for survival money.
Yeah, right.
But never took it out of the business for the first 18 months. Now the work demand has become so much so that I can't even afford to spend any time outside of the business, but I still refuse and take bare minimum wage, because at the end of the day, if you don't put money into the business, it's just not going to give you the money return. You've got to invest something to get the return.
Yeah.
So for that reason, yeah, I've constantly refinanced off that. So I'm a debt-free, technically at this point, a debt-free business.
Awesome.
And just looking at this year potentially in getting some debt, because at some point, I guess you need to move. So I'm right now a thousands of dollar business. Mm-hmm. So I think last year my turnover was about 170, 180. Mm-hmm. But if I want to step into the $1 million business, I now need to inject.
Right.
I feel that I've gone far enough.
Yeah.
Thousands. Now I need to inject if I'm really to
boost yourself. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I think everyone will come to that eventual point, but I don't think initially. I think you should be able to start on almost nothing.
Yeah, and it's okay to start small. You know, you don't have to have a multi-million-dollar business from day one, for sure.
No. No, that was a big lesson. Actually, I think maybe even getting down to business might have helped me learn that lesson.
Awesome.
Because I initially, I think we are in a world where, you know, all you hear about is the Facebooks and the Twitters and those guys. And those guys apparently made it in a day, you know.
Yeah.
And I've had to actually just learn to just go settle down, you know, like look at your percentages of growth. Don't look at your, you know, compare yourself to like, got to get this. And I guess it's different for those that are working IT, might be a different game. But for those of us that are working FMCG or consulting,
yeah,
it's a bit more a slow and steady road.
So what have been the main impediments so far to growth and funding of Saba's Health Foods? Is it a time thing? Is it that lack of sort of investment externally, or what? Yeah, what have been your impediments?
Time.
Yeah, right.
It's not money, it's time. So things like, for example, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, things like your Facebook page. You're supposed to update that every bloody day, and it sounds, for me as a food person, that means I'm supposed to create a recipe. You take a food picture that's relevant every single day. Then you're supposed to update Instagram every single day. Then you've got to do checking of whether your post reaches are coming through, and Facebook's new rules, it's really hard to get your organic reaches out there because Facebook blocks you unless you promote it. So then you've got to update your website regularly. Then you've got to make sure you keep your accounts accurately. Then you've got to make sure that you remember exactly what each unit's costing you so that you can do, your margins on each product all the time. So all these things boil down to time more than they do money. So this constant content, when they talk about this 24-hour news cycle, it's also 24-hour business cycle where people expecting new content all the time, new programs all the time, new recipes all the time, new stockists all the time. So because you're being watched all the time, you're expected to provide, we're now stocked at, like almost every day, basically, that can then be quite, I think it's time. Time is definitely the biggest constraints, I feel.
So do you feel in that case that there's a time and a place to bring in, for example, a professional to do a certain role for you? So, for example, you say that, the marketing side and the digital side is the difficulty. So is there an opportunity for you to bring in someone externally to help you with that side of your business? Or, is that something that you're just really not able to do because you can't possibly pay a staff member?
I think at the moment, actually, it's not the pay that's... I could probably bring somebody on board, I think, if I crunch my numbers. But my issue actually is one of the big weaknesses that I've got is my lack of people management skills. And as a result, I think if I had to then, I actually have to develop this role. Because, again, when you bring somebody in, you can't just say, hey, do what I do. Read my mind. So I think I actually, again, will probably need to take time out to be able to develop the role and work out what I want this person to do. And exactly, you have to, that's one of the big things I've learned. I've used multiple self-contractors and I still continue to use them all the time. But one of the things I've learned is they only work if you can give everything on a dot-by-dot point. Walk you through this. This is what I need. This is what has to be done. And when you're running a small business or a startup, it can be really hard because you don't have systems in place. So, for example, when I guess McDonald's hires somebody, they just say, all right, we make our coffee this way, let's go. Whereas I'm like, I'm making up how we make our coffee every day. I don't know. Right. And you can't say to somebody, work it out, because that's what I do. Which could be, So as a result, I think I probably need to take time out to work out precisely what value that person has to add. So I do use subcontractors in very clear areas. So, for example, develop a website or develop this logo or get this packaging designed or this kind of very specific tasks. But it's very hard until you can really work out what
it is you exactly
what objective. But the thing is, I don't know what I want them to do until I see it. So at this point, so I acknowledge that therefore would not be possible yet until I can really